Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So in this video I'd like to show you how I made this workshop tool cabinet which rolls underneath my workbench. It's great for storage solutions and it's made out of 100% salvaged materials. Here is a little drawing that I did of the cabinet. This is how I want it to look. It's going to have some casters on the bottom. It's going to consist of 3 wide salvaged drawers, and it's going to have like a rim around the top here so that you can use the top part as a shelf and it stops things falling off. So this is going to live underneath one of my workbenches and it's going to be made out of 100% recycled materials. So recently I've been finding loads of pine furniture thrown out, and I've got these 3 pine drawers that I found, and they're quite long and quite shallow, so they're ideal for this project. They just need a little bit of fixing up. So you can see some of these joints I've opened up, so I'm just adding some wood glue here and using a brush to help to get the glue right into the cracks, and then using some clamps to help to get a good squeeze out and make everything nice and tight. And then I used a damp cloth to remove the excess glue and did the same to the other drawers. So these are solid pine with plywood bottoms, so they're ideal for this project, nice and strong. So then I removed the old knobs because I'll be using some different handles for this project. I added a layer of teak oil to them, and I'll keep these for a later project. So now I needed to fill in the holes where the knobs had been, so I've got some wood filler for that and a little blade to push it into the holes. So I have these 2 scrap bits of pine here that came off some flat pack furniture, and I'm going to use these for the sides of the cabinet. Now I'm measuring up the depth, so they're going to be slightly deeper than the drawers themselves, and I can use the speed square to help me mark everything up. I then cut these pieces out on the table saw. Then I wanted to mark up where the drawer runners are going to go. I've previously checked all this and I just need to add a couple of lines here so that I can use those as a guide later on when adding the runners. And I transferred the markings over to the other side to make sure everything's nice and consistent. Here are the handles that I'll be using. These came off some old kitchen cupboards that I found on the street. So I want to centralise these, so I'm just using the tape measure now to help me with that. And the combination square came in handy here to give me consistent markings. I then used an awl just to push some holes, some indentations for the drill. And I'm drilling clearance holes here for bolts which will be added later. Here are the handles that I want to use, and they're a bit dirty, so I'm just cleaning them up with a sanding block. And then I need to find the appropriate bolts to fit these. So now I want to make the drawer runners. I have some scrap strips of pine offcuts in my workshop, so I'm going to use those for that. Now I can mark them up and cut them on the miter saw. So once I'd made the first cut, I could use that one as a template to cut the rest. And I want to round over the fronts of these runners, so I've got something round here, and I'm making a reference marking so that I can take it to the disc sander and make it nice and round. So that will help when the drawers go in It will help them to go in smoother and not catch, and it won't damage the fronts by splitting or chipping the wood. I also sanded the top side where the drawers will run against. I then drilled 3 countersunk pilot holes in each drawer runner on the drill press. Now I could assemble the sides and add the drawer runners. So I'm adding plenty of glue here, and I'm just using those marks I made earlier as a guide to attach them. And to attach them, I'm going to be using drywall screws. Once the first side was done, I could use a ruler to help me to align the second side and to make everything nice and consistent. So now I want to add some candle wax. I've got some old candle wax here from a candle, and I'm going to add that to the tops of the drawer runners, and that will help them to slide smoothly when the drawers go in. Right, so before I go any further, I want to make sure that these drawers actually fit into the runners nicely. I'm just going to give them a check. Okay, the top on. Okay, that looks pretty good. I have this scrap piece of pine that should work well for the top, and I think that sticks out a little bit too much, so I'm going to cut it down slightly on the table saw. And now I need to measure for the width for the bottom panel, and to cut that I'm just going to use the sides as a template so that they're consistent with each other, the bottom and the sides. And I could then cut my bottom panel. And then using a speed square, I can chop off the ends. So now the top fits nicely and it doesn't stick out too much. And I've just got it kind of dry assembled here to make sure the drawers do open, because I've used quite a small clearance. Because this was flat pack furniture, it's got lots of holes in it where there was dowels, so I'm just going to add dowels back in and then cut them flush to just eliminate all those holes. Now I'm just scraping off some of the finish with a blade to get better glue adhesion when I glue this all together. I could then add plenty of glue to these joints and start assembling the cabinet.
For this I'm just going to use some standard wood screws and pilot holes and countersink the screws. And as I go, I'll just use the speed square to make sure everything's nice and square. And for a bit of extra strength, I'm going to add a couple of dowels in each side of the bottom. And I'm going to, I've got a bit of tape there on the drill to make sure I don't drill in too far. Then I could cut the dowels flush with a pull saw. So now to add the top, I'm going to be using these pine bed slats as cleats, and I'm going to attach these inside, and then I'm going to use these to attach the top, and that way it won't expose any screws, so it will look nice and seamless. So once I've cut the first piece, I use that as a template to cut the second piece. Clamps came in handy here to make sure I could work with minimal frustration. And again, I'm just adding pilot holes, and I'm going to add dowels in a moment. So the screws are going to make it all nice and tight, squeeze it together, and then when the dowels go in, they will just cover all the screws, because I don't want any exposed screws on this cabinet. And even the dowels were all out of reclaimed furniture. I didn't buy any of these dowels. So now I want to add some 45-degree angled support braces to this cabinet frame. So I've made the first one, and then I'm going to use that as a template to cut the rest. And the idea of this is to keep the cabinet square while I'm building it, and to just give it extra strength, because it's going to be holding tools and possibly moving around the workshop sometimes. So I'm adding plenty of glue here. And again, I'm going to countersink the pilot holes and add some dowels to the exposed areas just to hide all the screws. So you can see here I'm on the last one, and I want to push it into square now. So I'm pushing the cabinet square. I've previously checked this, and that will keep everything locked into place until I get the back on, and once the back is on and glued, it should never move again. Now to add the top, I'm going to add plenty of glue to those cleats. Now I can get the top centralized with the combination square, and then get it attached with some screws. So if you're wondering what the clearance is for the drawers, it's about 1mm each side, so it's quite tight, but it does work. I've checked it, it's working fine. So now I want to add some trim to the top and bottom and the sides of the cabinet frame. Again, this is more scrap pine, and I'm just going to rip it down on the table saw. And then I can offer it up and mark it for cutting. Again, I'm going to add plenty of glue here, and this will just help with rigidity as well when it's all dry. Keep the frame as strong as possible. And it will protect the end grain of the pine. I'm using panel pins here and a small hammer. If you have a nail gun, of course, it would be much faster, but I don't actually have one at the moment because I don't really do this sort of thing that often. And for the bottom piece, I'm using some longer pins. So then I ripped a little bit more trim for the top. I want to give the top an edge so that when I put stuff on top of the cabinet, it doesn't fall off the back or sides. I could offer these pieces up and mark them and then make the cuts. To apply the back bit of trim, I'm just going to remove the finish again with a blade to get better glue adhesion, and also on the sides, and then add plenty of glue and attach it with panel pins. And these pins, I piloted the holes just because I didn't want these thin pieces of pine to split. I'm using the same method again for these edge pieces. I want to round over those fronts on the disc sander just for cosmetic look.
At the moment you can see that when you pull the drawer out, when it gets quite far out, especially this top drawer, it wants to fall, and that's because of the clearance between the top of this drawer and the frame inside. So what I'm going to do is I've cut a few little scraps off here, the same thickness as the drawer thickness, and I've put a 45-degree angle on each end just to make sure it doesn't snag when the drawer is being put in or removed. And I'm just going to add these to the ends here. So now when the drawer goes in, these top parts here that I've added, they don't affect the sliding of the drawer, but when you want to pull it out, instead of it falling forward, it will catch on those. And I've gone ahead and done the same with the middle and the bottom drawer. You can see now it doesn't dip, stays nice and straight. And I've used little pieces of aluminium composite. I just didn't have any thin wood at the time. This is just scrap material, just pinned in with 2 pins, and I've just used a file to smooth over the edges, and that's working great.
So now I just want to double check that the cabinet is nice and square, and it is. And now I can add the back on. So I'm going to add plenty of glue to all the areas that will connect directly to the back. And for the back I've got some scrap plywood, which happened to be almost the perfect width. It was just slightly too short by a couple of millimeters, but that's absolutely fine. So that one's gone on without even cutting it. I didn't have a piece big enough to do the whole back, so I'm going to be using another piece to fill that space. So I'm just measuring that out now. And I could cut this piece down with a handsaw. So to make the 2 pieces rigid, because I didn't have one big piece, I have used some little screws and washers here through the centres where these 2 pieces join, and I've just attached them on the inside with a scrap of wood, and that's worked well. So I want to add some casters to the bottom, and I'm going to use these screws that have got nice thick shafts. I'm using a combination square just to keep the caster off the edge of the wood and consistent, and then I can use an awl to make the markings for the pilot holes. Now I needed to give the cabinet and the drawers a good sanding down, so I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper for this. I just want to take that finish off that the pine has, and I'm also using a sanding block to get into the awkward edges. And because it's quite rough wood, because I found it, I decided to paint it instead of finish it with an oil. And the mouse sander just helps me to get into all those corners. Then I gave it all a brushing to remove all the dust. And I've got this paint that I've made from old emulsion, white, black, blue, even a bit of purple. And I'm going to use a roller to add it to the drawer fronts and the cabinet. This part of the project was quite satisfying. The paint went on nicely and I gave everything 2 coats. And for the awkward areas, I used a brush. Now, once the paint was dry, I used some furniture polish, beeswax, to protect the paint and give it a nice sheen, nice dull finish. I applied it with a cloth. And then after about 10 minutes, I gave it all a buffing. Now to add the handles. So I've got a couple of washers on the bolts to give a nice solid connection. And it was nice and easy to just put the bolts through those clearance holes and everything lined up perfectly.
Right, so let me show you what I've got in these drawers. So on the top here I've got these containers full of screws, nuts, bolts, that sort of thing, and they can sit conveniently on top of here. In the top drawer I've got mitre gauges, spare push sticks, and all my attachments for my power tools, things like that. Here I've got stencils, pencils, a wood burning tool, and some spare saw blades. And at the bottom I've got various things. I've got a hand plane, some router bits, some Forstner bits, some chisels, a stud finder, and some spare impact bits. So these are all kind of things that I don't use that often. Okay, so that's about it for this video. This project took a little bit longer than I expected initially, but it came out good in the end. I like the grey colour, and the finish with the furniture wax looks really nice. I like how the handles look, and the drawers work well and they're nice and tight. There's not too much side to side movement in them. It does feel nice and strong, and the wheels work good too. So I'm pleased with it, and it cost practically nothing to make, and it was made just out of junk that I found lying around on the side of the road or in skips or bins. So if you did find this video useful or inspirational, please remember to like and also consider subscribing for more DIY related videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.